Um, Buying hay. Hay is a passion of mine. I really enjoy making hay, and it's like an art and a science to making hay. It really is. Like there's a number of different types of hay, and you all with horses and in the horse industry, it's your main feed source. And it could be your primary or only feed source. If you get good quality hay, you wouldn't need to feed any grain, depending on the activity level of your horses. So to be able to identify and know what good quality hay is can really save you a significant amount of money. Think of buying a bag of grain. I'm trying to think of, what's the name? Looks like a senior 12% or something. I'm trying to think of what the different feed labels are. 12, 14% protein on your feed. Well, every bag of feed comes with a label, right? Do you get a label when you buy a bale of hay? No. You could, because you can test hay, and there's the feed. I'm not going to go over this in much detail, it's the last thing in your handout. But folks that are really serious about making hay and selling hay will provide a feed analysis with their hay. It's a label for their hay. And we kind of think that's odd, but you wouldn't buy a bag of feed if you didn't know what the protein content was. I'm not saying you have to buy hay that's been tested, because I don't test any of my hay, but you can look at a bale of hay and say, yeah, this is good, or this is really not so good. I didn't get real good samples tonight before I left, but I did grab a sample of Timothy as I was leaving after we were feeding our sheep, just because it was close by. But I'll pass this one around. Take a whiff of it, smell it, look at the seed heads, look at the color. I'm going to go into some more detail about how you can pick out what good hay is, but is it coarse? Is it soft? Is it dark? What's it look like? But first of all, how do you know it's Timothy? I brought Timothy because that's easy to identify, right? What's the identifier of Timothy? How do you know it's Timothy when you see it? Oh, come on, you guys are asleep or what? Grab one of the seed heads. Can you see it? Hold it up. Right. I think anybody that's feeding hay should at least go to know what a Timothy head looks like. So take a look at a Timothy head when it goes by. It's that fuzzy thing. It's on the top of the plant. And as those heads get bigger and bushier, some of those heads are getting a little bit mature. You're allergic to hay? I have a moldier one here.
It'll be fine.
But is it musty smelling? That when you make hay, you need to dry it down so it won't mold. And there's always weather involved when you're trying to bale hay. Is it going to rain? If it rains on the hay, it reduces the nutrients. The nutrients leach out of the hay. So that not only is the quality less, but it doesn't have the good aroma, and the color goes away. So as a farmer, we're trying to get this hay made before that next front comes through. We're looking at our phones. We're trying to figure out if that black cloud's going to drop rain or not, and it'll drive you nuts. But sometimes we push it a little bit too hard, and we bale green clumps in the hay. When those green clumps get compressed in that bale, they're still alive, they're still respirating, and that air can't escape, and you'll get mold. So you won't typically see a whole bale that's moldy throughout, but there's that moldy spot or discolored spot in that hay. It heats up, and it can be moldy. So there's a lot that goes into making hay, and the more you know about that, the better educated as a buyer you can be for that. So just here's Timothy, for example. This isn't the best way to see, but when it's in the field, Timothy, like any plant, will flower, just like a flower in a flower bed. It's these little white petals come off of the head. Ideally, we want to get that Timothy cut when that head is still coming out of the leaf blade. When it's not big and as a number 2 pencil, when it's huge, we want to get it small and tender. It might not be as tall in the field, but it has less fiber, less lignin, because it's still immature in a sense. But as it gets tall and it's now the middle of July and your farmer's calling you saying, I got your hay for you, you know it's going to be a little bit overly mature and it has lower protein, lower feed value. If you buy hay from a farmer when he bales it and it's the last week of May, you're like, all right, because that's a good sign. That means he got it before the hay got old and lower nutritional value. We call this patriotic hay when it gets made on the 4th of July. It's 2 months too late in some cases, but farmers can only cover so many acres so quickly. And it's difficult because they want to make sure there's enough yield to cut it. So they don't want to cut hay early in May because they're planting corn, they're planting soybeans, there's other things to do. But then come late May or early June, now the weather's not cooperating, you need to have 3 or 4 days to dry the hay before it gets baled. And it's really a challenge, but it's a good challenge. I enjoy it. So that's one. Timothy's probably one of the more popular hay varieties. Orchard grass, I talked about that earlier as a pasture grass. There's the seed head. It's probably one of the second most popular hay types out there. Orchard grass might be mixed with alfalfa at times, but orchard grass can be a good feed. Let me back up a little bit. I mentioned before that with pastures, the grasses only go to head once a year. So you might have orchard grass that's first cutting orchard grass, so it includes the seed head. But second or third cutting orchard grass won't have a seed head, it'll just be the leaves of that. It'll only be a foot tall when the farmer mows it, and it's all leaves and no seed head. This is an orchard grass, but it might look more like this, where you don't have the stems like you do in the first cutting. So there's less stems means there's less fiber or more nutrition in that, and less starch.
What kind of hay is that?
I'll pass this around. This one, except for you don't want to smell this too much. But, actually, I had this sample from last time I did this class in April, and it got a little damp. No, it's not bad.
There's a spider underneath.
Well, that's part of the problem. All right, we'll get rid of it. All right, here's a knife box now. We call this just mixed hay or meadow hay. It's like meadow fescue. This is one of these fields that's been in hay for 50 years. There's an old pasture, and the cows are going and we're making hay on it. But it's softer. If you compare it to that one, there's less stem. It's a more finer grass. It might be more. It is more attractive. It's just old. There's no square for that one. Hang on. But think about when your horse is eating the hay, they don't want something that's sharp and tough. That's a softer type of texture. But the smell isn't the best. It's a couple years old. So that's orchard grass. But then there's other legumes that we talked about before. You have alfalfa or red clover, and most oftentimes we'll mix a grass with a legume like orchard grass and alfalfa, or timothy and alfalfa, or timothy and clover. So you get the alfalfa or the legumes add a little bit higher protein to the hay. And then there's some other grasses that might be used for hay, but we won't go into too much detail. But I mentioned earlier that horses eat a lot of hay and should, but a 1,200-pound horse would eat up to 24 pounds of hay a day. That's 2 to 3% of their body weight. So that's probably a half a bale or even more per day. The key is to try and get them to waste as little as possible, right? So your feeding techniques are trying to keep them trampling it, but sometimes they might waste 18% of their hay, which is 4 pounds. So try and feed it in a feeder so they don't end up just stepping on it and wasting it. So if you feed hay for 9 months out of the year, I'd say 25 pounds a day, it's 3.5 tons of hay per horse per year. That's like a wagon load, a hay wagon load of hay. And that's what, at 3.5 tons times, say, 250 a ton, $700, $800 to $900 a horse a year in just hay alone. Or more, depending on what your price of hay is. But if you weren't feeding hay and you were feeding more grain, that's even more expensive. So they should be hay or pasture. But here's where you can help yourself a little bit in identifying what is good quality hay and what is not so good. If we look at this sample, let's rate this. Is it bright green? No. Moderately green? Maybe. The lighting's a little bad, but moderately green? It was, maybe when it was baled. But we're kind of down here in a slight hint of green, right? What about leaves? Is it very leafy with fine leaves, or is it moderately leafy, fair amount of slightly coarse leaves? You guys have looked at it before. Kind of coarse. Yeah, somewhat stemmy. Yeah. And feel to the touch, it's not soft to the touch, right? More of a firm. Now the other type of sample, that was more soft to the touch, right? So we would call this one maybe a fair hay quality, and I would tend to agree. It's not exceptional. I don't even know if I'd call it good, but it's not terrible, but it's fair. Unfortunately, this year there was a lot of fair hay that was made. It was wet, it was hard to make hay, the hay got overly mature, and it quickly went to this brown status. So there's a lot of this poor to fair hay that's on the market, and that's all there is in the market. There isn't a lot of good, excellent quality hay. But take a look at the color, the leaves, the stems, the feel, and that'll lead you to a pretty good idea. Is it good or is it not good? So how do you when we're making hay, I sell hay out of the field. That means as soon as I bale it, when I cut it, I'm calling a customer and say, hey, in 3 days I anticipate having hay ready to deliver to your farm, and I'd like you to get your help ready because I want that wagon empty and back to my farm the next day. But I'm going to give them a discount for doing that because I don't want to unload them in my barn, store them for a few months, and haul them over to your house on a pickup truck where I can take you a few hundred bales real easy. So that's how you can save some money on your end. Coordination is key because I only have 4 or 5 wagons to bale into. I can bale 600,000 or 800,000 bales a day, but I want to cut. If we got a good string of weather, I want to keep cutting. I want to keep baling for 3 days straight. I need that wagon empty and need it back. I'd like to turn them over as quick as possible. So for that, get them empty when you say you're going to get them empty. Build that relationship with the farmer, and you're going to get a discount on the price. He's going to be happy, and both parties are happy. But you got to have a place to put it. If you only have a small area in one of the stalls to put it, you're not going to be able to get 500 bales in that. You're going to have a 500 bales at $200 a ton out of the field. Versus in the winter, you might have to pay $250 or $300 a ton. You can save almost $1,000 in a year by buying your hay out of the field during the harvest. That might even pay for a small shed to put the hay in by the savings you get that way. When I say $200 a ton, does that ring a bell to you guys, or is that like, well, what's that mean? Can anybody buy hay by the ton? But by the bale? Yeah. And I sell hay by the bale because it's easier for people to, okay, you're getting $5 a bale or $6 a bale. Do you ever ask what the bales weigh? No. Can you tell a soft bale from a heavy bale? Yeah. But do you know what 30 pounds or 50 pounds feels like? It's kind of hard to judge, but I'll go into that later. But anyway, I'll get into that a little bit. But knowing what the bales weigh is important because you may be passing up a deal that you're not even aware of because you're not sure what your bales that you're currently buying weigh. But to really understand what kind of hay you want to buy, you must understand what it takes to get it into that bale. Farmers are raising a crop. Hay is a perennial crop, so they go plant it every year, and they keep a hayfield for 3 to 5 years. Some hayfields are always a hayfield, like this one here. This was an old dairy farm pasture, and it's at a steep hillside, and it's best if it stays in grass because if we put corn or soybeans in, it's going to wash and erode. So we fertilize it, manage it, but we just keep making hay on that field for as long as I've been doing it, and as long as the previous owner did as well. But they need to soil test, they need to lime, they need to fertilize, they have to plan ahead. Thinking about what crops growing in that field this year, when am I going to plant hay again? Some farmers will plant corn, soybeans, wheat, and then hay for a few years, and then back into corn. So they follow a rotation. They don't just plant hay every year, or once the hay is done, they don't plant hay again. They usually plant corn or something else. So they do some management. They got to fertilize. They want to control weeds. They don't want to have poisonous plants in the hay that are going into your farm. And then the real fun begins when it's time to cut. To tet the hay, which means to dry it out, to rake it into rows so they can bale it, and then bale it, haul it back to their farm or your farm, store it, deliver it. Lots of steps, lots of labor, lots of time, and plenty of equipment that is quite expensive included in that. So just to go into a little bit about the haymaking process, has anybody made hay? Baled hay? Yeah. Good. It was a nice, cool day, right? You gotta make hay while the sun shines, no matter how hot it is. But it's gonna take a few days, maybe 2, maybe 4 days to dry the hay from when it's cut to when it's dry enough to bale. We need to try and get the water out of that stem and the leaves as quickly as possible. And these are different machines that are used to cut it. There's our disc line. But a disc line is like a lawnmower, spinning blades that go through conditioning rolls, basically rubber rolls where the hay goes through that crushes the stem. And by crushing the stem, it allows the moisture to get out of the stem quicker than just cutting it and laying it down with like a sickle bar. That conditioning helps dry it down quicker. There's a hay line that's still used but less popular. It has a saw blade underneath where it cuts it with it's called a sickle bar. It's slower and they're still in use, they're still effective, but the disc lines have by far become the most popular because you can drive 10 miles an hour and they work really well. What else here? So timing, we have limited time to get the hay made. So we want to target when these heads are just starting to come out of the grass. And this is a little bit more mature, but there's a fairly small head. But some of these heads are getting a little bit bigger. But these heads are not extremely large. Sometimes these heads can get on, if it were allowed to get older, these heads might get half the size of my little finger, and that means it's, you know, overly mature, and it's, you know, less palatable. So the farmer's got to try and get that cut as quickly as he can. Leave it at that. So once it's been cut, usually the next day they'll come in and they'll spread that hay around to get the hay on the bottom exposed to the sun. If it lays in a mat, the top dries, but the bottom doesn't. So a tedder just spins that hay around, loosens it up, it spreads it out, exposes it to the sunlight and the air, and it can improve that drying time. And usually by the third day they can bale. If you were to tet alfalfa or a clover that has, you know, grasses don't have those broad, the leaves attached in the same way as alfalfa or clover. Those leaves will fall off on clover and alfalfa if you do it when it's dry. So you would tet that when there's still dew on the plant. It retains those leaves. But it's much easier to bale grass than it is a legume because of that leaf shatter loss. And the leaves actually have most of the nutrients, so if you lose the leaves, you lose that quality feed. So then the rake just basically takes all that hay that's spread out and rolls it into a neat windrow so they can come along with the baler and bale it up. So it's essential, but it's not the most fun job. And then baling, as you're aware, there's different kinds of bales. You have the small square baler here that puts them in the wagon. They might weigh 40 pounds, 30 to 50 pounds, depending on the farm. Some balers don't have kickers and they have to stack them on the wagon. Other balers are round balers, a less expensive machine than a big square baler like this one up here. It takes a lot more horsepower to use a big square baler. You know, that square baler might be a $70,000 square baler pulled by a $70,000 tractor versus a $15,000 or $20,000, maybe $30,000 round baler. And a baler might be $5,000 to $15,000. So different ways. Round bales are quick to make, cheaper to make, but they don't store as well. They don't stack as well. They don't haul as well. They're round. A big square bale you can stack on a flatbed real nice. You can handle them with forklifts. Small square bales, most of the time it's all handwork. There are some balers or systems where the bale is dropped on the ground and another vehicle is coming along and picks up the bales and stacks them on a stacker wagon and hauls them back to a shed and stacks them that way. Has anybody seen a bundle of small bales? It's called Bale Bandit, I guess is the name, but it'll put 21 small bales into a big square bale like that. So when you get to the farm, you can unload it with a forklift, and then you cut the metal bands, and it has three layers of 7 small bales in there. So when you feed it, you can still feed small bales, but when he makes it, they don't have to handle them all as much. But, lots of different ways to bale hay, but it all requires, you know, good weather, and the capacity of the farm is the biggest challenge. You can only do so much in one day. So I went through these all a little bit already, so I'm going to leave it go. But most common is a small square bale, and really, you guys, the horse market, are the ones driving that market. Most other farms don't want small bales, but if the equine industry went away, the small bale market would go away too, for the most part. If you get to a scale to use larger bales on a horse farm, you can save money on your hay purchases because the larger bales are cheaper because there's that much less labor involved. But they're harder to handle. You need a tractor now to feed, or at least to unload them. I'll skip them, but the big square bales are pretty nice because you can cut the strings and take a slice of that bale off, just like you can a small bale. But when they get to the farm, they need to somehow unload it, and you need to put it under the roof. So that's the challenge. So here's a piece about bale weights. It's interesting because you got many farmers making many different size bales, but think of a 35-pound bale, which is pretty common. Most bales are in that 35-pound range. At $5 a bale, that's $285 a ton. But if you have a 50-pound bale at $5 a bale, that's only $200 a ton. So, have you weighed your bales lately? I know my bales are about 40 pounds. That puts us in this 260 range, something like that. If we're at $5. There's rarely any 70-pound bales, but there are sometimes. But at $5 a bale, it's 143. Maybe it's $7 a bale for a 70-pound bale. It's still cheaper than that one. So knowing what that weight of the bale is can really be good. So I would encourage you to buy by the ton if you can, or at least know what your ton price is. Most often it's in higher, larger quantities, but there's hay auctions in Lancaster, and all that hay is sold, most of it's by the ton. And it's a standard, it's pretty similar. So you can still figure out what you're paying if you know the weight of the bale. So just try that, weigh a bale and see what it weighs. And it's a little bit about the activity level of the horses. That's going to vary as to how much, what feed they need, as you in your nutrition class would know. But know what that activity level of your horse is to determine what kind of quality hay or how much hay can you feed, or can you just feed hay by itself. So a little bit more about identifying good quality hay, kind of that chart in more detail. So weigh that bale or weigh the whole lot, average out, figure out what that price is. Look at the color of that hay. Is it bright green? If it's bright green, that means it was cut prior to when it was mature, which is good. It was cured properly. Sometimes with hay that's baled is a little bit too green or too much moisture, it can get discolored because the heat increases. Hay will heat up after it's baled for a period of at least a month, but if it gets too hot, it means it was a little bit too much moisture. It can get a brownish look to it. That means it got a little, they call it malburn, or it got a little too hot. But if it's got good color, that's a great sign. Again, if it comes down to green or yellow and black, then it's progressively less quality. So the maturity is really important. How old or young was that hay when it was cut? So if it's more mature, it's less digestible. The protein level is much less. Look for the seed heads. Look at the stems. Are they really tough or are they more tender? They'll indicate the maturity of that hay. And also the varieties. We're going to see different variations with some varieties of hay, but a lot of times it comes down to the maturity more than anything. If it's got good color, soft to the touch, that's a great indication. Good smell. You're going to find some impurities or other things in your bales, but hopefully not too many. Hopefully there's not too many weeds or other poisonous plants. I mean, you probably all have a story about what you found in a bale of hay at some point or another. I mean, rocks, snakes, groundhogs. I mean, what else? You know, bales, have you ever seen a snake in a bale?
No. I'm from Europe and
Okay.
I literally have,
Yeah, snakes.
it's not common to have a snake in England.
I'll find a snake in a bale every year, I think.
Like a dead one or a live one?
Yeah, they're just garter snakes, little garter
Okay.
snakes, but it's not uncommon to see. What, any of you found anything else in the bale? That trash, right? I mean, there's plastic,
We had a
paper,
bullfrog that was like this big.
frog,
Yeah. Mouse.
mouse.
Yeah, and a rabbit. Leftovers.
Yeah. Sometimes metal. I mean, we found one of our rake teeth. Sometimes the pieces from the equipment, our rake has teeth that brush the ground, and one of the bolts broke, and we ran it through the baler, and we found a rake tooth. Rocks. I mean, it's not uncommon to find some rocks. And the reason is, when we're raking, we're actually rubbing the ground with the rake teeth, and if there are some loose rocks, they might get mixed in with that roll, and whatever's in the roll is going to get picked up by the baler. But all these things, lower the quality of that hay. And you don't want to find, nails and wire and that sort of thing, but sticks, I mean, near the fence row, you're going to pick up a stick every once in a while. But these all would be things that you can negotiate with the person you got the hay from. You said, hey, this isn't what I expected. So probably one of the more major things is, are there any molds on that hay? Is there any other molds or musty smell, which indicate those mold spores? Also, the bale size affects, more on the farmer's perspective, they need to be a little drier when they're baled, or else they risk molding. So the small bales, again, they require more labor to produce a ton. It's easier to push one of those moldy bales away if you get it, because it's just one bale, versus if it's a big bale, it might be a lot bigger area of that bale that's lost. So it's something to consider. Just a little bit about on feed analysis, which relates to the last few pages of this piece here. I'll just dab on the surface a little bit yet, but DM stands for dry matter. So that's how much stuff is left after you take all the water out. So grass in a field is probably 80% water and 20% dry matter. When we dry it down for hay, we get rid of a lot of the water, but not all of it. So there's about 15% water and 85% dry matter. So that's what the dry matter content is. So it's usually 85, 89, 90% dry matter in hay. So there is still moisture in that hay. It's not completely dry. DE stands for digestible energy. So that's to measure how much energy is in the hay. And there's some calculation as to how much your horse needs and to how much is in the hay. I won't go into those details. Digestible energy, that's another one. So then there's the chemical analysis. So as they figure out what else is in there, these are some of the key ones. The total digestible nutrients, or TDN. So that's how much is digestible in that bale, or its energy value. So this might be used instead of that as a digestible energy. It's usually in that 40 to 55%, and it's pretty common. You'll see that on every report, but a lot of times the crude protein is a pretty good indicator as to how much protein. This is that number. The top label on your feed bag is how much protein's in that feed. Similar with hay. Maybe it's a lot of times they're in that 6% or 8% of a grass hay. And some of our legumes like alfalfa or clover are going to be higher, 15 or even more % protein. But if I had to guess, I'm thinking this hay, it could be 5 or 6% protein. It's not extremely high protein hay. Fair amount of lignin in this. It's fine, it's not going to make them fat, but it's an okay feed source. But if this were nice and green and soft to the touch, then I would expect that we would be higher than 6 or 8, maybe 9 to 10% protein. And all is dependent on when it was cut, the maturity of that hay. I won't bore you too much with NDF and ADF, but there's different fibers that are basically how much of that is available to the horse or the animal. I'll let you read it instead. It's a little complicated. I don't know if it's going to be a big piece of your class here or not, but check that out if you're interested. But the thing is, hay isn't quite like grain. There isn't one value that is key or answers all the questions to say this one's better than that one. They basically take all those measurements and they put them into a formula and say, okay, this one is 150, this one is 120. But it's hard to accurately say exactly which hay is better than another. We can group them pretty well. As I say, this one is good, this one's not so good. You can't always get the visual analysis correct, but you can do a pretty good job of identifying a good sample versus a bad sample. So a chemical analysis usually is a good way to go, but it can be somewhat misleading as well at times. So as you get a load of hay or you're looking to buy hay, check it out. Look for the seed heads, look at the tops of the plants. Did it bloom? Is it brown or green? The bigger or fuller that bloom or the top of the seed head is, it's very late maturing. That's going to be a lesser quality. Good quality hay is going to be bright green, no mold, not dusty. And then as we lose that green color, you might think, well, did it get rained on? And I mentioned a little bit about rain, but when the hay is dry, when it's to the point where it's ready to be baled and it's rained on, the soluble nutrients, the nutrients that are in this stem and leaves, can get leached out into the ground, and it leaves less nutrients, less protein in that plant or in that hay once it is dried out and baled again. So it usually loses color, it loses the green color, it loses the smell, and it loses that protein or the quality. So you can, even if that's a very common question when people buy hay, was it rain? And if hay was cut tonight and it rained overnight, and so it was still green when it rained on it, those nutrients weren't soluble. It didn't wash. It wouldn't have hurt the hay if it rains immediately after it's mowed. But if it's dry and it rains on it, then it can take those nutrients out readily. So if a farmer's honest and says, yes, it did, but it was immediately after I mowed, that's really not a problem. Did it rain just before it was ready to bale? That's when it can be the worst. There are a number of farms that make, there's one farm in particular that makes thousands of acres of hay, and they just keep mowing all summer long, and they'll mow right before rain, and it turns out to be excellent quality hay. But it's the timing that's the key. So keep an eye on those seed heads. If those Timothy heads are big and long and huge, it's not a good sign. So in summary, it's not easy to buy hay. It's relationship based. Get a farmer that you feel comfortable with. He's going to supply you with what he feels is the best quality he has, and he'll be honest with you, saying, "Well, this is the best I have. It's not what I'd like to sell, but it's all I have to sell. But I can guarantee it's not moldy." Those things, relationships can go a long way. Keep in mind, what do you need? Do you need hay that has very high protein? activity level horse, or do you need just a decent hay to keep your horse at a condition that they're in? So when you get the hay, take a look at, say, weigh a few bales, see what it weighs. Maybe have a forage sample done if you want. Maybe you work with the farmer to see if he already has a sample done. And hopefully that farmer will work with you. If he gets a moldy bale, if you find a moldy bale, they'll swap it out. I would say go to the farmer with any concerns you have, because he doesn't want you telling your neighbors that you were disappointed. He'd rather know himself if there was an issue, just like anything else. Questions on hay? Yes?
So as far as dust goes, if you're at the end of your kind of group hay that you purchased and everything, and it's kind of getting dusty, is that an issue to clean? Like if there's dust in the bale? Like if you open the bale and it's a bit dusty, is that an issue?
I guess my question would be, was it the whole lot of hay that you had prior wasn't
No,
dusty?
it's fine, but by the time you get some of the stuff that's stacked in the corner and it's
Yeah.
that gets kind of dusty. Is
That,
a problem?
no, I don't see that as an
Okay.
issue. As long as it's not the mold dust
Yeah, so it's
from,
mostly anything.
right,
It
yeah.
can be just stuff.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly, yeah. And hay can be fed, it doesn't have to be fed the year that it was made, but it does tend to lose, this hay is still respirating, it's still losing moisture, and the quality does decline over time. So use up the hay that you have. The biggest challenge is when you still have some hay left in the barn and you have new hay coming in, don't feed them the new hay, because they're not going to eat that after, they're not going to eat the old hay after you fed them any of the new hay. So try and use up your old supply completely before you introduce the new stuff. But hay's a valuable feed. It's a significant expense on your part as an equine. On the farmer's perspective, they sell a lot of hay, and they need you guys too, because without the market for the product, they wouldn't have a place to go with it.
Any other questions?